Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here, and today I've got a special guest for my YouTube video, Matt Sperling, a fellow member of the MPL, a professional Magic player. And we're going to be going over two of the most recent announcements that deal with Alchemy, the upcoming changes that are going to be going live on April 7th, and the announcement that Alchemy will not be used as a format at the upcoming set championships. They're going back to using standard and historic. So, welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Excited to
And
be a fan and viewer of the channel. Happy to be a contributor.
I'm happy to have you. So, were you surprised when you heard that Alchemy is being replaced by standard at the upcoming set championship?
I was surprised. I thought, in fact, if you had told me one of the two formats from the last set championship, Historic and Alchemy, had been swapped out, I actually would have guessed Historic, all else equal, for two reasons. I presumed that the investment, so to speak, in Alchemy would be an ongoing effort that had a more serious commitment behind it than the ongoing investment in Historic. And also, there's sort of some reading of the tea leaves going on out there about sort of whether Historic is going to be the long term, eternal type format on Arena, or if it's going to be something that can be mirrored in paper, like a Pioneer or something like that. And so between all that, I mean, I don't know where that's going, but I would have sort of predicted that Historic was going to get jettisoned, if anything. But ultimately, I thought actually the balance of the probability was probably that it was going to be the same, Historic and Alchemy. So I was surprised that Standard is getting swapped in.
I guess I was a little bit less surprised just because I didn't think when they started Alchemy on Arena that it meant they were just going to give up on standard completely. So it kind of makes a little sense that they did this push with Alchemy. They did it at the last set championship. They did an Arena Open for it. And so now they might want to go back and do standard a little bit more. And I'm not sure that really you could doing Alchemy and standard together at an event makes a ton of sense because I think that there would be so much overlap that it would be confusing for viewers and just
I agree with that.
like for the players they wouldn't really feel like they were playing two different formats in the tournament so much.
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I wouldn't have. I definitely would have had like Alchemy Standard very low on the list. I think the prospect of having like two different blue red decks that are both forking spells but not the same spell or like that stuff. Yeah, that seems like just a mountain too high to climb for the viewers to keep track of it, for players to enjoy practicing and keeping everything straight, and it would sort of highlight all the taxes that Alchemy places on players and viewers would sort of be brought into full contrast in that structure. So I wouldn't have predicted that. Yeah, I mean, I guess okay, and so maybe we're viewing the switch to standard in this tournament maybe differently from the outset than you're viewing it more as perhaps an indication of an alternating focus between standard and alchemy with a desire to ultimately support both, where I had sort of viewed the coming of alchemy as sort of a coronation that said standard is going to be more of a magic online and paper format and less of an arena format. But maybe that's me being too sort of myopic about what alchemy meant.
I was hoping that that was what was going to happen with Alchemy. Like I was a really very much a big supporter of Alchemy when they started it, and I thought that it was really going to be the end of standard on Arena, or standard was really just going to become a just a niche format. But
Mm-hmm.
that is not what's happened in terms of how people have participated in Alchemy. Like I think that most of the users on Arena are still just playing standard, and they didn't. Alchemy has not been a big success. It just hasn't.
That I agree with. So I mean that sort of leads us to the elephant in the room in some respects, which is how much should we take away from this decision about which formats are going to be played in the New Capenna Set Championship? How much should we take away from that in terms of indicators that Wizards is going to support Alchemy on an ongoing basis in its current form, or could Alchemy possibly have been an experiment that ultimately didn't land in the way they had hoped it would land with consumers, and now they're still figuring out what to do with it? So I'm sitting here as someone that doesn't have an answer to that question. I'm trying to figure this out like the rest of everybody who's looking at these announcements and formats, and there's an open championship this weekend that's Alchemy's. I mean, there's like, I don't know. I can't figure out sort of what they want to do with it. I can't figure out whether if I was going to go buy into a format, if they'd want me to buy into historic, standard, alchemy. So I've struggled with that. I mean, what's your sense of sort of which way the wind is blowing on medium and longer term support for alchemy?
Well, unfortunately, I think Wizards has a pretty bad track record of starting, coming out with an idea, making a kind of half-hearted effort to make it succeed, not kind of budgeting for the idea that they're going to have to make some revisions and maybe corrections, and then just letting something fall by the wayside. Like to an extent, I think that happened with Pioneer, and now they're trying to restart paper. They're going to try to bring Pioneer back, but that's after years of neglect of it at this point. And you and I played. We almost won the last team series championship. We finished second, but that was another one of those ideas where they had big ideas when it first started, and
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of wasn't going that great. And rather than trying to fix it, they just kind of let it fall by the wayside. So I would like to think that they're going to keep going with Alchemy and that it's going to get better over time, but that isn't really their track record for how they do things. They kind of seem to have an approach where they just try something for a little bit, and if it isn't a big success, they just give up and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and digital is no exception. You have formats like Brawl, where I think for all of Wizards' faults with data analysis, I mean, I think you and I would both agree that sometimes they get a little bit tunnel visioned on what the online play data says when it comes to
Yeah.
which cards are successful or whatever. But I mean, for all that flaw in their approach, they do know who's playing what, and sort of, I mean, I trust them to analyze that data. So they can tell nobody wants to play Brawl. They can tell that even with all the bells and whistles of Alchemy, people might want to play Standard more often than they want to play Alchemy. And to me, that would be like a pretty big sort of canary in the coal mine if Alchemy was sort of the new girl at the dance, and and the Standard is supposedly like sort of not that interesting, or people had their frustrations with the Seeker's Chariot, but it's still there. Whatever, all the flaws the Standard has. If even in this moment in time, the data showed people were, let's say, 1.5 or 2 times more willing to play standard. And I don't have the data, so I'm not saying that they were. But again, I think Wizards does have the data and can read that. Yeah, that's sort of my best guess as to which way the wind is blowing. That they're sort of getting ready to maybe put Alchemy on ice potentially, or keep it fringe, just because it doesn't seem to be that popular. You and I know from hopping in the queue to try to test or make content that it doesn't seem to be that popular. It doesn't seem to cause like wildfire, certainly. So yeah, I mean, I have the same sort of concerns that you have about their track records. Well, I mean, and I'm okay with them trying something, and like I don't want them to keep investing in Brawl year after year if people don't like Brawl. So I'm sort of okay with them jettisoning what's not working, but I'm a little bit sort of just wondering whether Alchemy is headed in that direction, given that how much of our collective mind share has now been consumed by alchemy in the last several months.
Well, a couple of points. First, I think there are actually avid fans of Brawl. I play Brawl every once in a while, and it's fun. I mean, it's not. It would never be my main focus on Magic, but I think Brawl is actually pretty successful in Arena.
Oh,
On the
interesting.
other
Okay.
hand, I don't know if you saw it. There was some data from Untapped's tracker that where they showed how many matches or games were played of Alchemy versus Standard versus Historic, and I think it was over the course of either February or March. And Standard was outpacing Alchemy by like 5 or 6 to 1, I think.
Okay.
And
I hadn't caught that, but I'm not surprised to hear it.
yeah, since then they've changed it so like the default for everybody, if you're playing Arena and you just don't even know what the different formats all are, instead of playing standard, you're now going to be playing Alchemy. So that probably would have even things out some, but you would think that people like that probably don't have Untapped installed. Like
Yeah.
the people who are installing Untapped are pretty invested players.
So again, so that's good. I mean, I didn't know that there was data behind. Again, you can sort of tell, what folks are interested in. What's going on with the wait times in the queue. You can sort of you get a sense of it. But that's interesting to hear that. And then yeah, I mean, we can probably, if we want to, shift into sort of some of the reasons behind Alchemy not taking off like wildfire. But I think like a number of them are just sort of not necessarily inherent to what Alchemy is, but more implementation, the results of implementation details about sort of their misunderstanding of the economics of getting into Alchemy and their vision for Alchemy as not rebalance standard, which is what we initially thought it might be, but actually, wonky card format and rebalance standard and trying to, spin those two plates at the same time. So yeah, I mean, the state of, yeah. So anyways, all that to say, when I saw the announcement that the next set championship was not going to feature Alchemy, I was surprised. And then upon reflecting, I think it's sort of a bad, harbinger of what's to come for the Alchemy format in combination with what we all think is the current state of like player enthusiasm about the format.
Yeah. So, what was your impression of Alchemy coming out of the last set championship? Like, did you think it had been successful? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I thought the last set championship brought out some of the good and some of the bad of Alchemy. And a lot of times, on Twitter in our 280 characters, we try to like classify something as the great or it's a mix of good and bad. And for Alchemy, it was like it ended up actually a pretty fun place. Like the decks I thought the decks were pretty fun. There were people that innovated. Some of the cards that like City Soccer Connoisseur were really strong, but also like featured things you can't do in paper. Um, some of the cards that people were sick of, Allrun's Epiphany and the like, weren't really a big part of the tournament. So all that stuff sounded pretty good. It actually felt pretty good playing the game, playing a lot of games at Alchemy in preparation for the tournament. Ended up not hating it, although I did kind of hate it before they nerfed Tyrant, which we'll get to. So then the bad was like they had to actually implement power level changes really close to the tournament start date. Not like a day before, but like close enough that I felt like we wasted time testing, and I wasn't sort of thrilled to have to, in some sense, start over when they had to re-nerf a card that had already been nerfed in the Tyrant. I thought that to me that chips away at consumer confidence in the product, which I think is a really big flaw in what they were trying to do with it. And it sort of felt like I was part of this outsourced playtest or QA group regarding these cards. Like I don't want to be spending my time preparing for a tournament and they go, yeah, everyone's been doing a great job preparing for the tournament. We learned that this card is too powerful. We're going to nerf it again in rapid succession. That felt not good in the in lead up to the tournament. And then coming out of the tournament, I had a chance to reflect on like what would sort of my takeaway be from the tournament. And it's like the breakout card of the tournament, in my view, which is the City Soccer Connoisseur Alchemy card, where it has Death Touch, and they just discard a card and it makes a blood token, and it was a really powerful card. And if I was looking to get in, I understand I may need to get this card, acquire this card, but that's also like the most likely card to get nerfed if their philosophy and approach is going to be to sort of blunt every knife that gets a little too sharp. Then like that, in some sense, that's like the last card I'd want to craft. So it puts you in a really pretty tough spot as a consumer, especially with the economics they've set up, where they're not going to give you a refund if you do come at it, if you do craft that pro tour or not pro tour, sorry, that tournament winning deck. You craft that, and then they nerf it, and they go, well, we hope it's still playable, so you get to keep it. I thought that was a really, really stark example of how they're not really thinking about this from a customer experience perspective. look, if they nerf a card and they give me a wild card, but the card is still good because they've said we're going to try to nerf it so it's still play. Then great, I'll go buy it again. I have that choice, right? They've given me that choice by giving me the wild card, but they've also given themselves the proper incentive to make the card still be good. Whereas under the current structure, I go build that deck coming out of that tournament because I'm excited about City Soccer Connoisseur. If they were to nerf it next week, and they miss, and so it's not powerful enough to see play anymore, I am the one that has to foot the bill. So anyway, that's just an example to me of how they sort of misunderstood the economics, and that sort of weaves its way into everything. Even the tournament we're playing with fully stocked accounts, it weaves its way into how I felt about it because I felt like somebody watching who was excited still couldn't really invest in the format with confidence, and so that really struck me coming out of that tournament.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I don't tend to, like, I don't feel as passionately about the economy parts as a lot of people do because I just, I basically draft a lot on Arena, so I just don't feel the effects of the economy in the way that
Mm-hmm.
most people do. And I know that that's the case, so it's a little bit hard for me to exactly relate to people, but it has not seemed like a fair economy at any point in the course of its existence, and it really, I think, contributes a lot to the negativity towards the format. And also, I would just say that it does feel like they have not done a normal amount of effort in terms of balancing the cards for Alchemy because they're kind of relying on the idea that they can make these changes, which I thought for the first wave of cards they did a reasonable job. I mean, it certainly wasn't perfect. Like Townraiser Tyrant was definitely too good,
Mm-hmm.
and City Stalker Connoisseur I think it's proven to just be the best card at this point, and it should be on
Yeah.
the chopping block for a nerf. But maybe they don't want to, you know, deal with nerfing a card that people have crafted. But the more recent set of cards that came out with Neon Dynasty, I really Painful Bond is just I don't understand how they printed a card like that. Like it's so over the line. I
No, yeah, I mean, it's both. It has both problems. It has I'm outsourcing the tuning part, right? Normally, they do some, adjusting of the knobs behind the scenes, and they'll identify, okay, this card needs to cost 3 or more, and they're sort of outsourcing that to us. And it also has the problem of like what they're pushing. It doesn't seem like they put their, I don't want to say best and brightest, but they haven't devoted the most resources to these. It's like they pushed a bunch, like instant speed card draw has been pushed in multiple Alchemy releases, and cards that punish expensive spells, whether it's City Soccer Connoisseur, or there are other cards that do, or the Tyrant that we talked about a moment ago,
yeah.
like that. Those aren't really the boundaries that you want to be pushing, and they've learned that lesson the hard way over what are these 27 years or something. So yeah, I totally. I sorry to interrupt you. I couldn't agree more that like that. I think they've taken a few steps backwards in terms of the polish that they're putting on these releases, and I just don't think it's actually palatable to say we'll fix it. We'll fix the plane midair. It just I don't think customers, myself included, appreciate that. To learn which deck is the strongest, only to have to try to relearn it again in 3 weeks, it's just not that fun.
Well, I I don't mind that, but I think we're in an even worse world now where they've kind of decided that customers don't like having to go through having the cards that were just released nerfed. So it seems like they might just not want to nerf them. But I don't know if you've played much Alchemy, in the past couple of weeks. They had the Alchemy Metagame challenge, which it was just so painfully obvious that red black was the best deck, and just
Is instant speed Night's Whisper a playable card, as it turns out?
oh yeah, I've I've seen exactly one game where someone had to lose more than 2 life from the spells that they got from it,
Yeah.
and they still won anyway. It's just It's
Yeah,
really far over the line, and it's one of, I mean, it goes in a deck that has so much discard, and when discard is the best deck, it's so miserable to play against because normally you can, you craft your deck to try to target what you perceive to be the best deck, and when the
yeah,
best deck is discard, so few of your options for how to modify your deck actually matter. Like it got to the point where
yeah.
people are just putting Orvar in their main deck.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, you don't really want. Again, you don't want your strongest cards to necessarily be instant speed card draw or cards that punish the opponent for playing expensive cards and make the opponent wish that all the cards in their deck cost 1 or 2 mana, which is not. Most players don't have that intuition. Most players don't find that as fun as casting their favorite dragon. Yeah, so it definitely has those problems. And like, look, and again, it's like it feels like some of the fundamentals of card design and card balance didn't really show. I mean, Pokemon famously has a card called Bill, where it's just like draw 2 cards, no cost, right? And I'm not saying that like this new card for one in the black is Bill, but it's closer than you want to get. It's closer than you want to get. And again, I think they know that when they design a standard set, that we don't want to come anywhere close to Bill, where it's just like very low opportunity cost, draw 2 cards, and I feel sort of silly not playing it. And if I do play it, it's just sort of like it's always good because it gives me 2 other resources. Like they sort of know to avoid that, but then so yeah, so how does it show up here, and why are they slow to rebalance it? And you can't, and again, like when your strategy is we're going to fix the plane mid-flight, you can't course correct to, well, people didn't like that, so we just won't fix the plane. That doesn't work. That's not what we're, again, let's think about what we're actually solving towards, and I don't think that gets you there. So yeah, I share your concerns about that. Um, there's a sort of, there's a sense in which we all should be okay with like iterating, and we can sort of all be part of this like future league if that's what we want to sign up for. And to that, we have to now say, well, a lot of people don't want to sign up for that, and that's part one. That sort of empirically, people don't seem to be down for that. And then two, I think you have to have an economic structure that has that in mind. I mean, they're not charging their designers when they play Future League. They're not making them purchase. They make a new Sliver Queen. They're not going to make them purchase that card. Just a fun way of saying like, if you're going to do that to your player base, you better make it darn cheap to play deck A this week and deck B next week if you're going to have that strategy. So that's a really big mismatch, right? Again, I'm not, just like you said, you're not feeling that pain. I'm not feeling it either because we play in these events where we get a stock to counter, you draft or whatever the case may be. But I mean, we have to be able to empathize with that, again, it's not a far stretch for us to imagine that a player who has to actually live in the real economic realities of this platform is not going to be game for release it and iterate.
Yeah, definitely. I have another. I mean, this kind of ties into the concerns with the economy and just the idea that it doesn't seem like the cards are that well designed, at least in the alchemy expansions. I feel like both of them were just too large, and they have a bunch of filler cards in them that just nobody is interested in playing. And it's different from a normal set where the normal set they're serving a lot of different needs. Like they're printing cards for standard or, for constructed tournament level decks. They're printing cards for commander or brawl. They're also printing cards for limited. And if you go and you look through the cards that have been printed in the alchemy sets, there are a bunch of cards that just don't appeal to any of those dynamic or any of those demographics. So there's no reason for them to exist. Like, I think the sets are just too large. For example, I don't know how much you know about the most recent 30 cards. There's one card that I absolutely hate called Bellows Breath Ogre, I think. And it's just
Well, I have it up on this screen, so let me find it for myself.
yeah.
Bellows. I didn't spell it right. Ogre? No, I don't have it. Okay, describe that card for me.
So it's a red and 2 for a 3/3 that has this ability starting intensity 1. That what it is, it's just whenever it attacks, whatever its intensity is, it does that much damage to a target. And so it winds up And it starts
Hmm.
as like a 3/3 that kind of attacks as a 3/3 plus a ping, and then you get up to something that you deal a lot of damage.
And it's perpetual.
Yeah, so it could very easily be a card just in real life, except it if it changes zones, the intensity keeps
Yeah.
building. But that's just very clearly not a card that's good enough to ever see play in a competitive context. And it just doesn't look like, I don't think that that's the kind of card that it's going to be really fun and somebody's going to put it in their brawl deck. Like it just doesn't. It seems to have
Yeah.
no role to me at all. And I think that there's a fair number
Well,
of cards like that.
perpetual. Yeah, I think like I'll give you one success story and then one sort of
Yeah.
problematic pattern. The Yeah, perpetual in general, it's something that you can't do easily in paper, but you can do easily in digital. But the takeaway, I mean, but that doesn't make something fun. It's not fun. Like the novelty of what arena, like it doesn't. I don't know. Giving something perpetual -5/-5 instead of exiling it. It's just you just don't care if you're a player. It's not like the experience of a perpetual -2/-2 or perpetual. I mean, maybe there's some of the cost reducing ones where you get it back. Maybe it comes up some of the time. I don't know. I have not been impressed with that showing up as something that actually matters when the game's being played and how fun it is. And so that's a sort of a cautionary tale to me that like just because you can do something and you're paying a big cost for that. That's the thing. It's not free because you're creating a mismatch between your paper game and your online game, and you're creating a real disharmony between when someone drafts a card, they play a card in Commander, they play Friday Night Standard, and they play, and that, it could be one player or two players or whatever. They're doing these different activities. Having these cards mismatch, it is a cost, and then the upside just isn't there for me. I think a success story, the phenomenon you're talking about of like we'll buff 20 random cards, but we'll buff them in a way where they're not like pushed super hard. But I think like the Triumphant Adventurer having a big impact on this last tournament. The Triumphant Adventurer being a 2/1 death touch that used to be a 1/1 death touch, and you get to like attack with it and venture into the dungeon. And it sort of ended up being kind of an important card in that tournament, even though it looked like something that was like, oh, here they go again, making someone else up. So that's a success story. Again, it's a relatively modest success story because if they didn't buff it, then some other two drop. In fact, our team decided that we play a couple 2/3 death touch that wasn't an alchemy card. Long story short, like there's something there, and I would identify other success stories among the alchemy card sets. Like I thought Clone Crafter, and in particular the best of one deck that Sam Black put together at one point and went on a run with, that I actually played with and had some fun with. Like there were some successful designs in there and elsewhere as far as like making this whole thing fun about getting a random card from your opponent's deck. Getting a random card from your opponent's deck for me felt fun in a way that perpetual -2/-2 didn't feel fun. So, anyways, successes and failures for sure, but yeah, I think like on balance, there just wasn't enough, in my view, to keep this stuff fun, fresh, and worth the cost of entry.
Did what's your opinion on Key to the Archive? Did you find that to be fun, not fun, overpowered, not overpowered?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I played it in the tournament. Um, I think overall that was that card's. I think like that card and the class of cards where you're sort of conjuring out of a random spell book. I think those are actually like fun cards that are overall pretty successful. I may have implemented them slightly differently, but like yeah, overall I like those cards. I think the witch that gives you a card from the witch's spell book if you sacrifice it in a similar vein. I think was a cool card. That's relatively fun. Um, Now, does Key to the Archive sort of providing like that easy ramp to almost any deck? I mean, is that where you should be spending your point? I mean, I don't know, but like overall, I thought the experience was relatively fun. What do you think of that card?
I thought that card was fun for sure, and I don't know how much Alchemy you played before they did the round of nerfs where they nerfed Lear.
Mm-hmm.
I played a lot of Alchemy right when it first came out, so I played a lot of Key to the Archive with Lear, and
Mm-hmm.
that was really broken. Like it was very overpowered. But once they nerfed Lear, like Key to the Archive just wasn't even an important card at the set championship. So I think it actually is in like a pretty reasonable balance spot. And I thought that was just a really fun card. And the same thing with most of the spellbook cards, whether they were ones that actually saw play or not. I thought that they were all pretty interesting designs, with the exception of maybe the Tybalt Planeswalker, which is just that card is just a mess. I don't know if you've ever even read that one. It has
Have
this
not.
middle ability that is unbelievably confusing and for no reason at all. Um,
Yeah, I thought like you know some I have some reservations about these spellbook cards, but I think they suffer from some of the same problems that Venture in the Dungeon suffers from. Um, I've actually played at this point. I've played a lot with a few of these cards, and I couldn't tell you every card in the spellbook. It's just a lot to memorize. It's a lot of like to really understand exactly what the card does. It's just very hard. It's very taxing if you think about all the different cards they have. It's like the Adventure in the Dungeon, the problem is like it gives you this overwhelming set of choices. To now, thankfully for the spell books, they pare it down to 3, which actually does make it more fun in my view than Adventure in the Dungeon. But as someone who wants to understand what my deck does and what my opponent's deck does, and wants to be able to read a card and sort of understand without having to go to some Encyclopedia Britannica of what the spell cards are. It suffers from that problem, but I have to say, having played the cards, they do sort of play out pretty fun. And thank goodness they narrowed the choice to only 3 cards so that it doesn't show up as so overwhelming. So it's not my absolute dead-on favorite way Alchemy could be implemented. I would pick the card like deal a random card from your opponent's deck, whether it's the Catilda card, is it Catilda, the red one that costs a red
Verhilda.
and one? Yeah, that one or the Clone Crafter. I thought were like really fun cards that didn't tax you so much mentally, but just sort of gave you cool stuff at random intervals. That would be my pick. But the spell books are sort of an in between of like that and something that's a little bit clunky, a little bit taxing to understand the full universe of what your deck's doing.
I I guess I felt a little bit differently. Like I like it that the I guess I like the mechanics where you're conjuring cards from your opponent's deck, and I also like this Publix just because they added more variety
Mm-hmm.
to construct a game plan. I think that's just generally one of the problems with
Mm.
standard is that once standard gets somewhat solved, you wind up just only playing you play like a half a dozen different games and you just play them over and over
Yeah.
as you play the same matchups repeatedly. There just isn't enough variety in the gameplay where the the spell books definitely added another layer of variety, and also that you just got to play with a lot of cards that you would never actually put in your constructed deck to begin
Yeah.
with. But you would get a game state where some weird card you'd gotten off of the witch was actually good for you, or
Mm.
like Curse of Leeches or like the Blood Hunter bat. I can remember killing a lot of people with Blood Hunter bat that I got off of the witch. Just
Yeah.
obviously not a powerful enough card to play in general, but it could fill a role if you got it in the right spot. So I
I
thought,
like. Yeah. I think you're exactly right about having the right kind of randomness where it's intermediated by a choice, which reduces how random it feels. If it was just you get one random card, it's gonna feel really random. Yeah, it's actually like it's good. It does create variety and it does all those things well. And I think overall, I think that's probably why I felt like playing those games out. It actually added to the experience. Definitely additive in a way that persistent buffs aren't. Yeah.
yeah. So one thing we haven't touched on is the impact of having the alchemy cards and the rebalances take effect also in historic. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. I I don't like it. I think it doesn't let players opt into the wonky thing that's new, which I don't like. I think you're going to do something fun, experimental, wonky, but you're going to offer multiple formats. You should really sort of limit the paths that force people to head into that, to venture into that, to borrow from some of the cards. And so I didn't like that. I thought that it was too forcing on a portion of the population who just wants to play the sort of eternal format. And the other thing is just sort of the soul and character of what an eternal format feels like, to me at least, is like the cards from today and yesteryear, and sort of this thing where you sort of old is new and new combinations emerge with old cards. And to me, it's just not the place where I want to be changing what the old cards do. It's the place where I want to see whether can is Elrond's Epiphany even good. Not I don't want to see Elrond's Epiphany nerfed into clear unplayability or whatever. So I thought it was a miss. It wasn't like the end of the world. It wasn't like that big a deal that it was a miss, but I wouldn't, like, looking back and at the time, I would have gone the other way with that decision. What did you think about it?
At the time, I thought it was the right thing to do because I thought that Alchemy was going to prove to be more popular than Standard, and I figured you would want Historic to use whichever is the more popular version of the card. And
Hmm.
so it hasn't worked out like that. I do think that they probably had one of the concerns was, okay, we make these Alchemy cards, they're going to be legal in Alchemy, which is a rotating format. We want the cards to have some home after they rotate, which that's a year down the road still.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
not at
Yeah.
least having, like, Townraiser Tyrant wind up legal in Historic, I think would have been a problem. Whether that means you actually needed to nerf, Faceless Haven and Luminarch Aspirant, which were cards that people actually, played in
Hmm.
competitive Historic. Maybe you didn't need to do that, but I thought the simplest thing was to just have the two formats line up. But I think that has contributed a tremendous amount to people's negative perceptions of Alchemy, which has been pretty bad for the format. Like, I think that is probably the biggest negative
Hmm.
from that particular decision. Well, I mean, the biggest negative on Alchemy, I think, is the economy, but I think the second biggest is just that people did not like that it affected Historic, and that just made a lot of people really anti the format.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think look with the benefit of hindsight. I mean, maybe because then again because the alchemy cards are more popular. I have to be honest. Yeah, I didn't. I don't think I really gave full thought to the fact that like Townraiser Tyrant needs a place to rotate to, and so yeah, I mean that may well have been the driver, and so it may have been like best of intentions there, but like I don't know. Doesn't the Seeker's Chariot need a place to rotate to also? And if you nerf it into Oblivion, then it doesn't really your standard. I guess we're sort of back to whether you want to serve your standard audience or your alchemy audience. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't think I really gave that as complete a thought as it warranted. But now having thought about that a little more, yeah, I mean, maybe it's sort of the way you have to go. Or you just say, look, like if we're gonna rotate alchemy only cards, we're gonna wild card you out or whatever. But they don't seem really willing to take that approach.
So we've got this set of changes that's going to go live on April 7th, which will probably be the day this video goes live. And those are basically, they buffed a bunch of warrior cards, they buffed a bunch of elves cards. They didn't nerf any of the really overpowered black stuff that's been kind of running roughshod over the format. And then there's a handful of other things that are also buffed. So, what's your opinion on that approach to balancing, and what what impact, if any, do you think that those changes are actually going to have?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're entering they're so there's this thing I like to talk about almost always over the last 5 years of like where are you aiming in terms of power level, and there's like there's every card's power level is a function of where they're aiming and then how accurate they are with that aim, and I just think these cards just aren't really aimed high enough when you have other cards that were aimed high that end up being too high. This happens sometimes when they have like a really powerful set, and then they have this sort of come to Jesus moment where it's like we need to dial it down. So instead of having Throne of Eldraine, we'll have some other stuff that's not as powerful. And oftentimes, like the new cards really struggle to have an impact in those formats that are dominated by the older cards. And you'd think in Alchemy they have the toolkit now to avoid that problem, but it doesn't seem to be playing out that way. So I think that these cards, again, there may be the sort of the 2/1 death touch exception applies. There may be a couple of these that lead to a strategy that does revive a strategy that at least tier 1.5, if not tier 1. But overall, like I think they aim high on some of the cards that are brand new to the format, and they just don't aim at the same level with the buffs. And so that's consistently struck me as weird. The 4 blue and 4 colorless and 2 blue, discover the formula, instant speed, draw 3 cards, everything in your hand. I mean, think about where that card's aimed. Instant speed card draw. And then think about some of the cards that they've buffed from the existing file and where they're aimed, and it's just not the same place. So that continues to me to be striking. And these cards no exception. So yeah, I mean that's I think the headline. And then like you said, I mean I think that the format itself may have been more in need of nerfs as opposed to buffs. What's your sort of? I think you probably spent more time staring at the file, thinking about content creation, thinking about the upcoming tournament. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, so there's one thing I have to remind myself every time I look at the list of changes, and it's that they aren't necessarily trying to balance the format just for people who are going to be playing, at the highest levels of competition. Like, I think it's perfectly fine for them to say, okay, here, we think that people would like to play elves more, and, let's make them a little bit better, and maybe those people have some more fun. I think that that's perfectly fine, and I think that that might be a big part of what they're doing. I think the problem, though, is that they really Alchemy as it standard Alchemy, the place that it's been in since Neon Dynasty came out, has been really bad. Black has been really overpowered, and the fact that they're not making any changes, I think, really is the format's not going to be healthy if they can't adapt more quickly to what kind of becomes an apparent balance problem. And I wonder
Yeah, go ahead.
why they aren't doing it. And I mean, like one possible thing is that they feel like they haven't had enough time to gather data and then implement the changes and release them, which, I mean, maybe that's true. I think that's kind of lame if that's the explanation. But I also kind of worry that they may have this approach that they're doing some sort of data mining, and they're looking at the data and they're saying, okay, well, we know that people's perception is that this is too good, but our data is saying it isn't. But I think that's just a mistake with the way that people actually play Magic. I think they need to be balancing to get people's perception to be that the format is a balanced one, not, trying to balance behind the scenes.
Yeah.
If they're balancing with data and they never show us the data, and they don't really ever offer convincing explanations for what they've done, you're not going to convince people who think the format is unbalanced that it's balanced by doing that. And I think that's kind of dooming Alchemy right now.
Yeah, a couple of things there that were really interesting that you said that I hadn't really thought about before you said them. I mean, yeah, one is thinking about perception versus reality. And yeah, there is a really meaningful sense in which the perception is more important when it comes to win rates and balance. I mean, you know, in the world where rock, paper, scissors is still the same balance as we know it now, but everybody thinks that throwing rock every time is an unbeatable strategy, that probably results in very, very few people wanting to play rock, paper, scissors. Even if the data shows that scissors wins just as much as rock, if everybody thinks that throwing rock is dominant, it's going to have an impact on how people think about it and whether they're likely to play it. So that's really interesting what you said there, and that rings true to me. Another thing is I can imagine them looking at the data but in a slightly different way. I think they might have conversations internally potentially about like the bronze ladder metagame and the casual unranked metagame, and that data might be telling them that elves is a popular strategy, and without any care or concern for whether elves becomes a strategy at mythic, they might view it as a worthy endeavor to buff some of the elves, to do some fan service to that portion of the audience. Now that strikes me as sort of trying to do a lot of things at once, and trying, and also, trying to serve people that maybe don't respond to the incentives the same way. Like maybe they're not likely to invest in those new elf cards. Or I don't know. Maybe that's a worthwhile endeavor, maybe not. But I hadn't thought about them doing that until you started talking about the fact that like they may be looking at the data and thinking about different audiences, and then they go and buff the elf cards, but they're not even trying to buff them to tier ones. And like I was saying, maybe there is a different target for these. So there's certainly like they may have a broader mandate than the one that you and I are considering, and so maybe this stuff is valid. But I mean, none of it solves what's happening at the mythic level. I mean, there's no amount of fun players at bronze that aids in your experience, Andrew, as a content creator, someone trying to grow the game and someone trying to have fun at mythic. So, anyways, there's a lot there, but I hadn't thought about it exactly that way.
Yeah, I kind of gave up on playing on the Alchemy ladder because I was getting paired against too many people who were in silver or bronze. Once I got to the point where I was happy whenever I got paired against someone whose deck only contained 60 cards, I realized it was time to stop. That like, the ladder was
Yeah,
just too dead. But
yeah,
um, I yeah, I would like to be more enthusiastic about it, and I'm gonna try. There's one card that's getting buffed on that list, Spell Satchel, which I've always thought was close to being a good enough card, and it's actually getting a pretty big buff. So I'm definitely gonna try that one out. And I'll probably try the Warrior stuff out a little bit, even though I know it's going to be bad. I think there's just this inherent problem that by not nerfing any of the black cards, you're you're dealing so much splash damage to any kind of creature-based strategies you might want to be good, because Meat Hook Massacre is just inherently going to be part of, like, a big part of the format for as long as black mid-range decks are the best deck in the format. And Meat Hook Massacre is just so brutal to any sort of deck that's looking to, have multiple creatures in play that you just, if you're not willing to knock that down a peg, you just not nothing else you're going to do is going to matter. Unless the only thing that might matter is if you just make creatureless control decks good, and they could beat up on the black decks somehow. Like it,
yeah,
it's it's very far away, I think, from being a fun format to play. At least if you're talking about playing the most competitive decks. And I don't think these changes are going to make it closer to being a fun format. Which is,
yeah. So, I mean, between where these changes are aimed and the decision to have the set championship not involve alchemy, certainly seems like they're almost sort of pointing it at a more casual audience. And whether it's out of necessity because the more competitive players just aren't showing up, or whether it just looks that way, I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it, I continue. It's always sort of mixed messages around sort of like, it's even just a lot to take in. I don't know. I find myself like, a spoiler containing alchemy buffs, it's just very different to me than a spoiler of like new cards. The spoilers of new cards, even like, I don't know. I just think it's a more exciting tool to introduce new ways to play. And to some extent, alchemy is sort of going to be forever burdened with that disparity. It's fun to look at a new, even if like, if you're going to add some new like flying wizard to the format, like you can buff the existing symmetry sage, or you can create a new flying wizard, and everyone will continue to not understand, to not care about symmetry sage. And there's just, even though those are kind of the same thing, like I didn't care about symmetry sage before, now I do, or there's this new card, I didn't know it before, now I know about it. I don't know. Something to me is more exciting about reading about that new card that has a new set symbol on it and does something new. And then of course, the problem of I can't buy a paper copy if I really have fun with it. Anyways. So I think like there's some of these problems are somewhat structural, and some of them are self-inflicted wounds related to the rollout.
That's that's kind of surprising to me because it goes against what I thought was going to be the big appeal of Alchemy to players, which admittedly is not, this is not borne itself out. I thought people were going to be happy about Alchemy because I thought they were going to view it as taking their existing collections and making them more enjoyable. If they
Mm.
like if you thought about it, imagine they didn't print any of these digital only cards. They were just doing a balance pass on the existing standard cards. If you were
Mm.
somebody who, if you're somebody who had only crafted one deck, you might get screwed. But if you're somebody who owned like a decent sized collection of standard, in theory, this was going to take it and was going to make some cards that weren't really usable before. They were going to become usable either through buffs or because some of the stuff that was keeping them out of the format was going to get nerfs. Like you were just going to, it was going to lead to a bigger percentage of your standard collection being playable. And that I think has really failed for a lot of reasons. One is because the digital only cards in a lot of cases were just too overpowered and they just kind of crowded out
Yeah.
the cards that you would have hoped would have gotten a chance to shine. And then the other thing is just that, I mean, Alchemy is so poorly balanced right now that it's kind of, it's like a 1.5 deck format or something. So there's just, it really, they haven't, to me, that was the promise of Alchemy. And I think they've really failed to deliver on that.
Yeah, that was the $1 million if in what you just said was like if there weren't these new alchemy cards that were sort of consuming all the oxygen in the room, then maybe some extra life would have gotten breathed into these existing cards. But that if is just not how really not how it played out. I mean, whatever they were doing to the existing card draw, it wasn't Discover the Formula or Knight's Whisper. So yeah, I mean, I think like yeah, they there's a sense in which they tried to do two things at once, and one of them sort of consumed the other, and people were confused, and everybody had something to sort of be upset about, and you know, obviously when you do two things at once, you'd like for it to play out that everybody has something that they can get excited about. I don't know if I don't know if it's a failure of the execution or just trying to do too many things at once or whatever, but yeah, it seems like these two things that they tried to do, they did sort of cannibalize each other, and they did sort of lead to a really unclear picture of what they want alchemy to be, what I should want alchemy to be as a player, and why I should be excited about it. I thought it was going to be rebalanced standard and a chance to fix a standard format that had a really lot of importance in our competitive community. Standard, it was a chance to sort of like get it more right than we got it initially with the card files, but it just didn't end up being that. It ended up being that kinda, but mostly here are some new cards that we couldn't have made before because they use an RNG that you can't use in real life, and it's like, well, you know, I like Momir format on Moto where you get a random. I like that as much as anybody else, but I don't know that I want to introduce those dynamics at the same time I'm trying to, for the first time ever, rebalance a standard format on the fly.
All right, well, let's try to wrap this up on a somewhat positive note. So try to imagine that, something happens with Alchemy and 6 months down the road or a year down the road, we look at it and we say, wow, Alchemy's really had a good run. What would that look like to you? How do you think we could get to a point where you would have a positive feeling about Alchemy? And I can go first if you want to.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you give us your thoughts?
All right. So to me, I think it would be that I don't really care so much that they aren't necessarily going to have big events with Alchemy. I think they need to just focus on getting it to a point where it's just better balanced and more fun to play. And I think the way to do that is they need to focus more on buffing existing standard cards, trying to hit a more balanced format. And I think they need to focus less on printing these new Alchemy specific cards. Like, I think if they could edit their Alchemy only release designs down to like just being 5 or 10 cards that are the cards they think are just the best of their work, and that would make it so people felt like it was less expensive to get into the format from standard, and then just focus on the standard balances. And I think if they could just do, a couple sets like that in a row, people would start actually feeling more positive about Alchemy.
Yeah, I think if we look back and in whatever period of time we look back at Alchemy was a success over the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever, I think it'll be a function of better alignment between their iterative process and how it works and how the economics show up for players. And if you're going to iterate fast, it's cheap, and it feels like I get to sort of roll with it and feel good about trying new things. And it's for those people that want to try new things and wacky things. Or if they ramp down on the speed of changes and the aggressiveness with which they release sort of things that are half baked that haven't been fully tested, they sort of do more testing behind the scenes, and therefore they can stand behind it a little more and have a little bit more of a barrier to entry from an economic perspective. If there's just better alignment between those two things, then I think players might be willing to dive in, and then it might feel like something that's vibrant and not punitive. That's, I think, to me, that's like, again, that's the elephant in the room. For me personally, since again that's not my issue. For me personally, as far as like my level of fun with it, I don't think they were that far away last time around. It would be more just like learning quickly about what things are fun and doing some of the things that feel like the moment or generate a random creature and that, like, transmutate this creature into a random 4-drop, whatever, like that stuff. Do it, finding the fun knobs to turn would be a big part of it. And then just like jettisoning the stuff that's like, sort of industry designer fun, doing things that are hard to implement in paper, like who cares? Focus on the fun, get the economics right, and then again, like I didn't think they were like so far away from a fun format that they couldn't get to that place.
All right. Well, hopefully we see some of that. Wouldn't say I'm optimistic, but I'm willing to be proven wrong, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm not sure I'm rooting for that. I'm okay with going back to standard. I really value the online format that mirrors the paper format and the liking a card online and going and ordering a couple copies of that card on if physical copies of that card. That's been something that I enjoy more than cracking a digital booster of digital cards. So I'm not necessarily rooting to go that way. If it goes that way and everyone's having fun, great. If not, maybe we can get back to a standard format that's fun in a different way. And again, it offers those paper opportunities that I can't wait to return to.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. But let me just. I'm awful at the YouTube, shilling to get people to sub to your channel, and I'm kind of proud of how bad I am at it. But for people who don't know, for a long time you had a column, Sperling Sick of It, on CFB, which was, I guess it was kind of like an edgy humor column. And I remember one time I was featured in it, and I don't remember what the joke was exactly, but it was basically a joke about me being old.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me that that was like one of the things that had generated the most comments on the article, that people really seemed to like that joke. And I was shocked because, A, it wasn't a very good joke. You told me it was a recycled joke.
Yeah.
But people really liked it that you had said that I was old. So I'm just with that, I'm going to encourage people to leave a comment about Matt, how you feel about having Matt come on the channel. And if you could write that joke for me, in the comments, I would appreciate it. We're going to be looking for just good jokes. Doesn't have to be about Matt being old, although you're older now. You're not
No,
as old
I'm.
as
Yeah, it's possible I'm older now than you were when I wrote that joke.
no,
Scary.
it's not. But anyway, thanks for coming on, and I hope people enjoyed having you on the channel, and we'll try to do this again.
And everyone, please, for the love of God, like and subscribe to my friend Andrew's channel. I mean, if you take one thing away from this video, it's that you should like, subscribe, support the content. No, but as a fan and subscriber myself, keep putting the good videos out. One of the things I enjoyed the most about Alchemy, no jokes, no sarcasm, no nothing, was watching your content, going through new ideas, and that's how I learned about that Sam Black deck that when you made that video on it. So if you like this type of stuff, I mean, check out Andrew's other videos. Make sure you subscribe and hit that little notification bell. How am I doing? Is this better than what you normally accomplish at the end of the video?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, good, good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.